I was standing in the produce aisle holding a bag of oranges I had bought for my daughter since she was a teenager when my phone buzzed. It was Emily. Just one message. Mom, don't interfere anymore. Brian feels uncomfortable when you help. I read it again. And again. My hands went cold. After everything I had done, every bill paid, every crisis handled, every piece of their life I quietly held together, I was suddenly the problem. So I stopped. I stopped helping, stopped calling, stopped fixing what wasn't mine to fix. And that was when everything began to fall apart. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. Have you ever loved someone so much that you didn't realize you were carrying their entire life? If this story speaks to you, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. And tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? My name is Megan Nichols, and for most of my life, I have been the kind of woman people quietly rely on without ever really asking. I'm 62 years old. And I've lived in the same quiet suburb outside Naperville, Illinois for over 3 decades. It's the kind of place where neighbors wave but don't linger, where lawns are trimmed on Saturdays, and where life looks stable from the outside, even when it isn't. My husband Daniel passed away 10 years ago after a sudden heart attack. One moment we were planning a weekend trip to Michigan, and the next I was sitting in a hospital hallway trying to understand how everything could end in a single afternoon. After he was gone, my world narrowed in a way I didn't fully recognize at the time. I still had my job at the local library, still had routines, still had friends, but emotionally, everything began to orbit around one person, my daughter Emily. Emily had always been my bright spot. Even as a child, she had a softness to her that made people want to protect her. She cried at movies worried about stray animals and called me just to ask if I had eaten dinner. When she grew up and became an elementary school teacher, I wasn't surprised. She had a natural instinct to care for others. So when she met Brian Carter, I wanted to believe he would take care of her the way she deserved. Brian was charming in that polished, easy way some men are. He worked in sales, something online, always shifting, always growing, though I never fully understood what he actually did. He had a confident smile, knew how to hold eye contact just long enough, and always said the right things at the right time. When Emily introduced us, he shook my hand firmly and said, "I've heard so much about you, Megan. Emily says you're the backbone of everything." At the time, I took that as a compliment. They got married 2 years later in a small outdoor ceremony with white chairs and soft string lights. I remember watching Emily walk down the aisle, her eyes shining, her hand trembling slightly in mine before I let go. I told myself she was stepping into a life where she wouldn't need me as much anymore. I was wrong. It started with small things, the way these situations often do. A few months after the wedding, Emily called me one evening, her voice tight. "Mom, we're a little short this month. Brian's commission got delayed. It's just temporary, but could you help with the electric bill?" Of course I said yes. It wasn't even a question. I transferred the money that same night and told her not to worry about paying me back. Then came the next thing. And the next. A car repair that couldn't wait. A daycare deposit that had to be secured immediately. Groceries when things were tight. Rent once or twice when Brian's income was in transition. Every time it came with the same reassurance, this was just a rough patch. They were getting on their feet. Things would stabilize soon. I believed them because I wanted to believe them. When Ethan was born, everything deepened. The first time I held my grandson, something inside me shifted in a way I hadn't expected. He was so small, so warm, his tiny fingers curling instinctively around mine. Emily looked exhausted but happy, and Brian stood nearby smiling for photos, talking about how everything was going to be different now. But babies don't wait for stability. they demand it. Emily went back to work earlier than she wanted to, and childcare became an immediate issue. Daycare was expensive, and their schedules didn't always line up, so I stepped in. At first, it was just a few days a week. Then it became every weekday morning. I would wake up before sunrise, drive over to their house, pack Ethan's lunch, get him dressed, and take him to school once he was older. In the afternoons, I picked him up, helped with homework, made sure he ate something nutritious, and often stayed until Emily got home. Sometimes Brian was there. Sometimes he wasn't. When he was, he always greeted me with that same polite tone. "Megan, we really appreciate you doing this. It means a lot, Ma." But there was something about it that never fully settled right with me. It was too measured, like he was checking a box rather than speaking from the heart. Still, I ignored that feeling. Because Emily needed me, because Ethan needed me, and because if I was honest with myself, I needed to feel needed. Over time, my support expanded in ways I didn't even track anymore. I paid for Ethan's school supplies without mentioning it. I stocked their fridge when I noticed it was getting empty. I covered a medical bill when Emily hesitated too long on the phone before asking. I brought over casseroles, fixed small things around the house, reminded Emily of appointments she might forget. I became part of the infrastructure of their lives, quiet, constant, invisible. And the strange thing is, the more I gave, the more normal it all felt. There were moments, those small ones, that flickered at the edges of my awareness. Like the time I suggested Emily consider a different budgeting system, and Brian gently interrupted, smiling. "We've got our finances handled, Megan. But thank you." Or when I showed up one afternoon and found a brand new television mounted on their wall, far larger than anything they had before. It looked expensive. I remember asking casually, "Oh, when did you get that?" Brian answered quickly, "Got a great deal online. Timing worked out." Emily didn't say anything. She just smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Another time I overheard Brian on the phone in the kitchen, his voice low and tense. Something about inventory shipments, payments being delayed. When he noticed me, he ended the call abruptly and shifted back into his usual easy demeanor. "Just work stuff," he said. "Nothing exciting." I nodded, even though something in my chest tightened. And then there were the comments. Subtle. Always subtle. "Emily's lucky to have you," he would say. Or, "Not everyone has that kind of support." Or sometimes half joking, "We might never learn to stand on our own if you keep spoiling us." He would laugh when he said it. Emily would laugh too. So I laughed. But now looking back, I realize those moments weren't jokes. They were signals, small warnings I chose not to interpret, because interpreting them would have meant questioning everything I believed about the situation and about myself. I told myself I was helping. I told myself I was being a good mother. I told myself that love looked like this. What I didn't realize was that somewhere along the way, I had stopped being support and started becoming a system they relied on without ever fully acknowledging. And systems, once they're built, don't collapse all at once. They crack slowly, quietly, until one day something shifts, and everything begins to fall apart. I must have read Emily's message at least a dozen times before I finally put my phone down. Each time I thought maybe I had misunderstood it. Maybe there was a tone I couldn't hear through the words. Maybe she didn't mean it the way it sounded. But the sentence didn't change. "Mom, don't interfere anymore." Brian feels uncomfortable when you help. There was no softness in it, no explanation. No, "I love you" at the end. Just a boundary drawn clean and cold. I stood there in the grocery store for longer than I care to admit, my cart half full, people moving around me as if nothing had happened. I remember an older man reaching past me for a carton of milk, and I stepped aside automatically, like my body still knew how to function, even though everything inside me had gone still. Uncomfortable. That word stayed with me. Not grateful. Not overwhelmed. Not even we want to try on our own. Uncomfortable. As if my presence, my help had somehow become something inappropriate. I paid for my groceries without really seeing what I was buying, drove home on autopilot, and sat in my car in the driveway long after the engine turned off. The house looked the same as it always had. The same curtains. The same porch light. The same quiet. But something had shifted. When I finally went inside, I placed the grocery bags on the kitchen counter and just stood there staring at them. The oranges were still in my hand. I set them down slowly, like they might break. For a moment, I considered calling Emily. That was my instinct. It had always been my instinct. Fix it. Clarify it. Smooth it over. So I picked up my phone and pressed her name. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then it went to voicemail. "Hi, it's Emily. I can't get to the phone right now." I hung up before the message finished. I told myself she might be busy. Maybe she was in the middle of something. Maybe she just needed time. So I waited. An hour passed. Then 2. No call back. That was when something inside me, something quiet but steady, began to settle into place. I sat down at the kitchen table, my phone still in my hand, and opened the message again. I read it one more time, but this time I didn't look for hidden meaning. I didn't soften it. I didn't translate it into something easier to accept. I took it exactly as it was. She was asking me to step back, and whether she meant it fully or not, she had said it. I typed out 3 different responses before I deleted them all. The first was emotional. "Emily, where is this coming from? Have I done something wrong?" The second was defensive. "After everything I've done for you, this is what I get." The third was careful. "We should talk about this." None of them felt right, because all of them were about pulling her back toward me. And for the first time, I realized maybe I needed to let her move away. So instead, I typed something simple. "I understand. I'll step back." I stared at the words for a long moment before hitting send. It felt like dropping something fragile and not knowing if it would shatter. The message delivered instantly. And then, nothing. No typing bubble. No reply. Just silence. That silence stretched into the rest of the evening. I went through my usual routines, but everything felt off, like I was walking through a version of my life that no longer quite fit. I unpacked the groceries, put the milk in the fridge, arranged the fruit in the bowl on the counter. I turned on the television but didn't really watch anything. At one point, I picked up my phone again, almost without thinking, and opened my messages. Still nothing. That was when the memories started to surface, not in a dramatic rush, but in small, precise moments. Brian leaning against the kitchen counter a few weeks earlier, arms crossed loosely, saying, "We're trying to build something that's ours, you know. Too much outside help can make that harder." Emily nodding beside him, though she didn't quite meet my eyes. Another afternoon when I had brought over a pot of soup because Emily sounded tired on the phone. Brian had smiled, but there was a tightness around his mouth. "You really don't have to do this, Megan," he had said. "We're okay." But he had still taken the container, still served the soup, still let me clean up afterward. And then there were the smaller comments, the ones that seemed like jokes at the time. "We might get spoiled if you keep this up. "You're setting the bar too high, Megan. Emily's going to forget how to do things on her own." Each one followed by a laugh. Each one easy to dismiss. Until now. Now, sitting alone in my kitchen with my phone face down on the table, those words felt different. Not like jokes. Not like harmless observations. Like groundwork. Like something that had been building slowly, quietly over time. I stood up and walked to the sink, rinsing a dish that didn't really need rinsing. My hands moved automatically, but my mind kept circling the same question. Had Emily really felt this way? Or had she been led to feel this way? I didn't like where that thought was going, so I pushed it aside. Because no matter how I got there, the result was the same. She had asked me to step back. And I had said yes. The next morning was the hardest. For years, my weekdays had started the same way. Wake up early, get dressed, drive to Emily's house, let myself in with the spare key, start the coffee, get Ethan ready for school. But that morning I woke up at the same time and stayed in bed. My body didn't know what to do with the stillness. At 7:15, I found myself glancing at the clock, thinking Ethan needs to be out the door by 7:45. At 7:30, I almost reached for my keys. At 7:40, I sat at the edge of the bed, my heart beating faster than it should have, as if I were late for something important. And then I stopped. This wasn't my responsibility anymore. They had made that clear. So I stayed. I made my own coffee, sat at my own kitchen table, listened to the quiet. It felt wrong, but it also felt honest. Around 8:10, my phone buzzed. My heart jumped before I could stop it. I picked it up quickly, expecting to see Emily's name. But it wasn't her. It was Brian. I stared at his name on the screen for a second before opening the message. "Hey, Megan. Just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page about giving us some space. It's important for us to figure things out as a family. Hope you understand." There was no thank you, no acknowledgement of what I had done for them, just a reinforcement of the boundary. I read it once, then set my phone back down on the table. For a moment, something sharp and hot rose up in my chest. Anger, not loud, not explosive, but steady. He had always been polite, always careful. And yet somehow in all that politeness, he had managed to make me feel like an outsider in my own daughter's life. I didn't reply, because I had already said what I needed to say. I had stepped back, and now I was going to see what happened when I truly did. Not just for a day, not just for a moment, but completely. Because for the first time, I wasn't sure if my presence had been helping at all, and I needed to find out what their life looked like, without me holding it together. The first week of stepping back felt like learning how to exist in a house where the furniture had been rearranged in the dark. Nothing was technically wrong, but nothing felt right either. On Monday morning, I woke up before my alarm, just as I always had. For years, my body had been trained to move before the sun coffee keys car Emily's house. But now there was nowhere I needed to be. I lay there for a few minutes staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the heater. The silence felt heavier than it should have. At 6:45, I got up anyway. Old habits don't disappear just because someone sends a message. I made coffee, stood at the kitchen counter, and glanced at the clock more times than I could count. By 7:15, I knew exactly what was happening in Emily's house without even being there. Ethan would be sitting at the table, still half asleep, dragging his spoon through a bowl of cereal. Emily would be rushing around trying to find his backpack, probably checking her phone at the same time. Brian, if he was home, would be getting ready for work, moving in and out of rooms with that quiet sense of urgency he always carried. And for the first time in years, I wasn't part of it. At 7:30, my phone buzzed. I didn't move right away. I just stared at it from across the counter, my chest tightening. Finally, I walked over and picked it up. It was Emily. For a brief second, something inside me lifted hope, instinct, something familiar. I opened the message. "Hey, can you pick Ethan up from school today? Just this once. Things are a little crazy here." I read it slowly. Then again, there it was, that familiar pull. The part of me that wanted to say yes immediately without thinking, without questioning. Just this once. It had always been just this once. I set the phone down and walked away from it, pressing my hands against the edge of the sink as if I needed something solid to hold on to. This was the moment. Not the message in the grocery store. Not Brian's follow-up text. This. Because this was where everything either stayed the same or finally changed. I closed my eyes for a moment and took a slow breath. Then I picked up my phone again and typed carefully. "I'm sorry, Emily. I can't today. I think it's best if I really give you the space you asked for." I hovered over the send button for a second longer than I expected. Then I pressed it. The message delivered instantly. And just like that, something shifted inside me. Not relief. Not yet. But something close to clarity. Emily didn't respond right away. Instead, about 15 minutes later, another message came through. This time it was from Brian. "We didn't mean for things to be inconvenient. We're just trying to set healthy boundaries. I'm sure you understand." I stared at the screen, reading the words carefully. Healthy boundaries. It was such a clean phrase. So reasonable. So difficult to argue with. But there was something about the way he used it, like a shield, like a justification that made my stomach tighten. Because boundaries are supposed to go both ways. And somehow this one felt one-sided. I didn't respond. I wasn't going to be pulled into a conversation that had already been decided for me. The rest of that day stretched out in a way I wasn't used to. I tried to fill the time. I cleaned out a closet that didn't really need cleaning. I went for a walk around the neighborhood, noticing things I hadn't paid attention to in years, the way the trees had started to change color. The sound of distant lawnmowers, the faint laughter of children playing somewhere down the block. It should have felt peaceful, but instead it felt like I had been removed from something important. By Wednesday, the pattern began to shift. No calls, no messages, no requests, just silence. At first I told myself that was a good sign, that maybe they were adjusting. Maybe they were figuring things out just like Brian had said they wanted to. But then the silence started to feel unnatural, because for years there had always been something. A question, a favor, a quick update. Now, there was nothing. On Thursday afternoon, I found myself driving past Emily's neighborhood without meaning to. It wasn't intentional, at least not at first. I had been running errands, taking a slightly different route home, and suddenly there it was, the familiar street, the row of houses I could recognize even from a distance. My hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. I told myself to keep driving, and I did, but not before I glanced down the street. Her house looked the same. Of course it did. The same driveway, the same front porch, the same curtains in the window. From the outside, nothing had changed, and yet everything had. That night around 8:30, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Emily. I felt the same instinctive pull, but it was quieter now, more controlled. I opened the message. "Ethan forgot his math worksheet and we can't find it anywhere. Do you remember where you put his school papers last time?" I read the message, slowly taking in every word. There was no greeting, no acknowledgement of our last conversation. Just a question. A practical one. A small one, but not really small at all. because it assumed something, that I was still involved, that I was still part of the system. I sat down at the kitchen table, my phone in my hand, and stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to answer. It would have been so easy. Check the blue folder in the kitchen drawer. That's where I always kept his papers. But I didn't. Instead, I typed, "I'm not sure, Emily. You'll have to check your usual spots." I hit send before I could change my mind. A few seconds passed. Then her reply came. "Okay." Just that. Short. Flat. And then nothing. I set my phone down and leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. It wasn't anger I felt. It was something more complicated. A kind of quiet realization. For years, I had been solving problems they didn't even have to think about. Small things, big things, everything in between. I had made their lives smoother, easier, more manageable. And in doing so, I had also made it possible for certain things to go unnoticed, unquestioned, unchallenged. Because when everything is constantly being fixed, no one has to ask why it keeps breaking. By Friday, the cracks started to show. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in small telling ways. Emily called that afternoon not to ask for help, but to vent. I almost didn't answer, but I did. Her voice sounded different, tighter, frayed at the edges. "It's just been a crazy week," she said quickly. "Ethan missed an assignment. Brian's been stressed with work. Everything's just a lot." I listened quietly. She didn't ask me for anything. Not directly, but I could hear it in the spaces between her words. The expectation. The habit. The part of her that was used to me stepping in and making things easier. I didn't interrupt. I didn't offer solutions. I just said, "I'm sorry, it's been hard." There was a pause on the other end of the line. A longer one than usual. "Yeah," she said finally. "It has." We stayed on the phone for another minute or two talking about small things, neither of us addressing what was really happening. Then she said she had to go. When the call ended, I sat there for a while staring at my phone. For the first time, I could feel it clearly. The shift. Not just in them. In me. Because I wasn't rushing to fix it anymore. I wasn't filling the silence. I wasn't stepping in before they even had to ask. And without that, their world wasn't as stable as it had seemed. It was wobbling. Slightly. Quietly. But enough that I could see it now. And something told me this was only the beginning. The hardest part of stepping back wasn't the silence from Emily. It was the silence from Ethan. Children don't understand boundaries the way adults do. They don't see emotional negotiations or power dynamics or quiet shifts in control. They only feel presence or absence. And I had disappeared from his routine. A week after I stopped going over, Emily called me late in the afternoon. Her voice sounded careful, like she was choosing each word before letting it out. "Mom, Ethan's been asking about you." I closed my eyes for a second, my hand tightening slightly around the phone. "What have you told him?" I asked gently. "That you're busy," she said. "That you're taking some time for yourself." There was a pause. He doesn't really understand that. Of course he didn't. How could he? For most of his life, I had been there almost every day. I packed his lunches, helped him tie his shoes when he was younger, sat with him while he struggled through spelling words, listened to his stories about school that jumped from one topic to another without warning. I had been a constant. And now suddenly, I wasn't. Emily hesitated before speaking again. I was thinking, maybe I could bring him by for a little while just so he can see you. The old instinct rose again, say yes, open the door, make everything feel normal, but this time I didn't answer right away. Just for a short visit, she added quickly. It would mean a lot to him. Not to her. To him. That detail didn't escape me. I let out a slow breath. Okay, I said finally. He can come by. She sounded relieved. Thank you. We didn't say much else after that. The call ended with a kind of polite distance that still felt unfamiliar between us. They arrived the next day just after lunch. I heard the car pull into the driveway before the doorbell rang. My heart started beating faster in a way I couldn't quite control. When I opened the door, Ethan was already bouncing slightly on his feet, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "Grandma," he said, his face lighting up. Before I could say anything, he wrapped his arms around me. I hugged him back tightly, inhaling that familiar scent of laundry detergent and something faintly sweet like the snacks he always carried in his bag. "I missed you," he said into my shoulder. The words landed deeper than I expected. "I missed you too," I whispered. When I pulled back, I saw Emily standing a few steps behind him. She looked tired. More than tired, actually. There was a tightness in her face, a kind of guarded expression that hadn't been there before. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and there were faint shadows under her eyes. "Hi," she said, offering a small smile. "Hi," I replied. For a moment we just stood there, the distance between us more noticeable than it had ever been. "Do you want to come in?" I asked. She shook her head quickly. "I can't stay. I have to run a few errands," she said. "I'll pick him up in a couple of hours." I nodded. "Okay." She gave Ethan a quick hug, then turned back to me. "Thanks again," she said. And then she was gone. I watched her car pull away before closing the door. The house felt different with Ethan in it again. Warmer, louder, more alive. He dropped his backpack by the door and immediately started talking. "Grandma, we had a substitute teacher yesterday and she didn't even know how to spell. Because, can you believe that? And Dad got mad because I forgot my math paper and Mom couldn't find it and..." He stopped suddenly as if he had said too much. I noticed it, but I didn't react right away. Instead, I smiled gently. "That sounds like a busy week." He nodded, but his energy had shifted slightly. "Do you have cookies?" he asked, changing the subject in that quick, instinctive way children do. "I do," I said, walking toward the kitchen. "Chocolate chip." His face brightened again, and he followed me eagerly. We settled at the kitchen table, just like we had done so many times before. I poured him a glass of milk, set a plate of cookies in front of him, and watched as he took a big bite, crumbs scattering onto the table. For a while, everything felt normal. We talked about school, about his favorite video games, about a science project he was working on. He told me about a boy in his class who always tried to be first in line and how his teacher had to remind him to take turns. I listened, nodding, smiling, letting myself fall into the rhythm of his voice. But underneath it all, there was something else. A tension. A hesitancy that hadn't been there before. At one point, he glanced toward the door like he was checking something. "Is Mom coming back soon?" he asked. "In a couple of hours," I said. "Why?" He shrugged, picking at a crumb on the table. "No reason." I watched him for a moment, then reached across the table and gently touched his hand. "You can tell me anything, you know that, right?" He looked up at me, his expression uncertain. "I know," he said quietly. There was a pause. Then almost in a whisper he added, "Dad doesn't like when we talk about certain things." My chest tightened. What kind of things? I asked carefully. He hesitated, his eyes dropping to the table. Money, he said finally. And you. The words were soft, but they landed hard. What do you mean? I asked, keeping my voice calm. He shrugged again, but this time it looked more like he was trying to make himself smaller. Sometimes when Mom says she's gonna call you, he gets mad, he said. He says we shouldn't depend on you all the time. I felt a slow, steady pressure building in my chest. And how does that make you feel? I asked gently. Ethan didn't answer right away. He picked up another cookie, but instead of eating it, he just held it in his hand. I don't like when they argue, he said finally. Of course he didn't. No child does. I reached across the table again and squeezed his hand lightly. I'm sorry you have to hear that, I said. He nodded, still looking down. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked up at me again, his eyes searching. Did I do something wrong? He asked. The question caught me off guard, even though I should have expected it. No, I said immediately, my voice firm. No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. Then why don't you come over anymore? He asked. There it was. The question that had been sitting between us since the moment he walked in. I took a slow breath, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes adults need to figure things out on their own, I said. Your mom and dad are working through some things right now, and I'm giving them space to do that. He frowned slightly as if trying to understand. But I still get to see you, right? He asked. My heart softened. Of course you do, I said. That's not going to change. He seemed to relax a little at that, taking a bite of his cookie and chewing thoughtfully, but I could still see it in his eyes. The confusion, the uncertainty, the quiet awareness that something wasn't right, even if he didn't fully understand what it was. And in that moment, sitting across from my grandson at my kitchen table, I realized something I hadn't fully allowed myself to see before. This wasn't just about boundaries. It wasn't just about independence. Something deeper was happening in that house. Something that was already starting to affect Ethan in ways he couldn't name. And whatever it wasn't getting better. It was getting worse. A few days after Ethan's visit, I started noticing something I hadn't paid attention to before. Patterns. Not dramatic ones. Not the kind that jump out and demand to be seen. But small inconsistencies that once you notice them, don't let go. It began on a Thursday morning when I drove to a pharmacy 2 towns over. It wasn't my usual place, but I had a prescription that needed to be filled, and they were the only location that had it in stock. I wasn't thinking about Emily or Brian when I walked in, but I was when I saw her. She was standing at the counter, her back to me. At first, her shoulders slightly hunched in a way that immediately caught my attention. Emily had always carried herself upright even when she was tired. This looked different. There was a tension in her posture, a tightness. I almost didn't recognize her. Emily, I said, my voice coming out softer than I expected. She turned quickly, startled, her eyes widening for a split second before she forced a smile. Mom. Hi. There was something off about the way she said it. Not cold, not unfriendly, just guarded. What are you doing out here? She asked. I had a prescription to pick up, I said, gesturing toward the counter. What about you? Oh, just grabbing a few things, she said, glancing briefly at the items in her hands. I followed her gaze. A small box of children's fever medicine, a bottle of generic sleep aids, a pack of discounted vitamins. Nothing unusual on its own, but together, they told a quiet story. You okay? I asked. Yeah, she said quickly. Just a little tired. It's been a long week. I nodded, though something in her tone didn't sit right. We stood there for a moment, the air between us filled with things neither of us was saying. Then the cashier spoke up. Next, Emily stepped forward, placing her items on the counter. I stayed where I was, watching from a short distance, telling myself I was just waiting my turn. But really, I was observing. The cashier rang up the total, and Emily reached into her purse, pulling out a credit card. She handed it over casually, but I noticed the slight hesitation in her hand. The card went through the machine. There was a pause. Then the cashier said, "I'm sorry, it looks like this one was declined." Emily blinked, her expression flickering for just a second before she forced another smile. "Oh, that's strange," she said lightly. "Let me try another one." She reached back into her purse this time, moving a little faster, a little less controlled. She pulled out a second card and handed it over. This one went through. "Approved," the cashier said, handing back the receipt. "Thank you," Emily replied, her voice steady again. Too steady. She gathered her things quickly and stepped aside as if eager to move away from the counter. I stepped forward, then placing my prescription on the counter, but my attention was still on her. "Everything okay?" I asked again, lowering my voice. "Yeah," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "It's probably just a billing issue. Happens all the time." I nodded slowly. Right, but something about the way she said it felt rehearsed, like a line she had used before. We walked out of the store together, the automatic doors sliding open with a soft mechanical sound. The air outside was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. Emily adjusted the strap of her purse on her shoulder, shifting her weight slightly. "So, how have you been?" she asked. The question sounded normal, but it felt misplaced. "I've been okay," I said, taking things a little slower. She nodded. "That's good." Another pause. I studied her face more closely now that we were in the light. There were shadows under her eyes, not just from lack of sleep, but something deeper. Her skin looked a little paler than usual, her lips pressed together in a way that suggested she was holding something back. "Emily," I said gently, "if something's going on, you can tell me." She shook her head immediately. "No, Mom. Really. Everything's fine." There it was again. That word. Fine. The most misleading word in the English language. I didn't push. Not yet. Instead, I said, "You don't have to handle everything alone." Her expression shifted slightly at that. Just for a second. Then it closed off again. "We're not alone," she said. "Brian and we're working things out. We just need time to figure things out on our own." I nodded, even though the words didn't fully land. "Okay." She seemed relieved that I didn't argue. "Thanks for understanding," she added. I watched her for a moment longer, then asked, "Do you want to grab a coffee or something?" "Just for a few minutes." She hesitated. "I can't," she said finally. "I have to get back. Brian's waiting." Of course he was. "Another time then," I said. "Yeah," she replied. "Another time." But something told me that another time wasn't coming anytime soon. We walked to our cars in silence. When we reached hers, she turned to me briefly. "Take care, Mom," she said. "You too," I replied. She got into her car, closed the door, and started the engine. I stood there for a moment watching as she pulled out of the parking lot and disappeared into traffic. Then I got into my own car, but I didn't start it right away. Instead, I sat there, my hands resting on the steering wheel, my mind replaying everything I had just seen. The declined card, The second card. The quick explanations, the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept mentioning Brian as if his presence needed to be reinforced even when he wasn't there. Something didn't add up. It wasn't just a rough week. It wasn't just stress. Because I had given them money, not just once or twice, but consistently over a long period of time, enough to cover more than a few unexpected expenses. So where had it gone? The question settled into my mind, heavy and persistent. I started the car slowly pulling out of the parking space and onto the road. As I drove home, I began going over everything I could remember. Every time Emily had called asking for help, every reason she had given. Electric bill, car repair, school fees, medical expenses. Each one had sounded reasonable on its own, but together, they formed a pattern. Too many emergencies, too many gaps, too many moments where money seemed to disappear without explanation. And then there were the things I had seen with my own eyes. The new television, the expensive sneakers by the door, the occasional takeout containers from places I knew weren't cheap. Those things didn't match the story of constant financial strain. Not unless something else was happening behind the scenes, something I hadn't been allowed to see. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my hands were gripping the steering wheel tighter than I realized. I turned off the engine and sat there in the quiet. For the first time, the thought came to me clearly. This wasn't just about poor budgeting. It wasn't just about being overwhelmed. There was a missing piece, and whatever it was, it had been there for a long time. Hidden, covered, protected, maybe even by my own help. Because every time I stepped in to fix a problem, I had also made it easier for them not to explain it, not to question it, not to confront it. I had been filling the gaps, and now that I had stopped, the gaps were starting to show, and something told me that if I looked closely enough, I might not like what I found. Once the thought took hold, I couldn't unsee it. Something wasn't right. And for the first time, instead of rushing in to fix things, I stayed where I was and started paying attention. That alone felt like a shift. For years I had responded, reacted, solved. I had moved quickly, almost instinctively, filling whatever space needed filling before anyone even had to ask. But now, I was still, observing, listening, and the more I did, the more the small details began to gather into something larger. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I didn't want to assume the worst about Brian or about their marriage. But I also couldn't ignore what I had seen: the tension in Emily's face, the declined card, Ethan's quiet confession about arguments over money. So I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I asked for perspective. That Saturday afternoon, I called my friend Marlene Foster. Marlene and I had known each other for over 20 years. We met at the library when she volunteered after retiring from a long career in banking. She had a sharp mind, a dry sense of humor, and a way of seeing through situations that most people missed. If anyone could help me make sense of what I was noticing, it was her. "Bring coffee," she said when I asked if I could come by. "And don't soften the story. Tell me exactly what's been happening." An hour later, I was sitting at her kitchen table, 2 mugs of coffee between us, sunlight filtering through the window. She listened without interrupting as I told her everything. The text message, my decision to step back, the silence that followed, Ethan's visit, the pharmacy incident. All of it. When I finished, she didn't speak right away. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, studying me with a thoughtful expression. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's take this piece by piece." I nodded, my hands wrapped around my coffee mug. "You've been providing consistent financial support for how long?" she asked. About 3 years, I said. Maybe a little more. And during that time, she continued to have their financial emergencies decreased. I hesitated. No, I admitted. If anything, they've stayed about the same. She raised an eyebrow slightly. That's your first red flag? I felt something tighten in my chest. Okay, I said slowly. Second, she went on who controls their finances, Brian, I said immediately. He handles everything. Emily's mentioned that she's not great with numbers, so he takes care of it. Marlene gave a small, knowing nod. Another red flag. I shifted in my seat. That doesn't necessarily mean anything bad, I said. Some couples divide responsibilities like that. True, she said calmly, but healthy division doesn't mean lack of transparency. Does Emily have access to their accounts? I thought about it. I don't think so, I said. At least she's never talked about checking anything herself. Marlene tapped her fingers lightly against the table. All right, she said. Third, those purchases you mentioned. The television, the shoes. Do they match the financial story you've been told? No, I said quietly. And the emergencies, she added. Do they come with clear explanations? Documentation or just urgency? I felt a slow sinking feeling in my stomach. Mostly urgency, I admitted. There's always a reason, but it's quick, immediate, like there's no time to question it. Marlene leaned forward slightly. Megan, she said gently, what you're describing isn't just financial instability. It's a pattern of unmanaged or possibly hidden financial behavior. I swallowed. You think Brian's hiding something? I asked. I think, she said carefully, that either he doesn't have control over their finances, or he has too much control and Emily doesn't know the full picture. The words settled heavily between us. I stared down at my coffee, watching the faint ripple on the surface. But why push me away? I asked. If there's a problem, wouldn't it make more sense to keep my support? Marlene didn't hesitate. Because you make the problem visible, she said. I looked up at her. What do you mean? You're consistent, she explained. You pay attention. You ask questions even if they're gentle ones. As long as you're involved, there's someone in the system who might eventually notice that something doesn't add up. A chill ran through me. So pushing me away, I began, removes the oversight, she finished. It creates a closed loop. Brian controls the finances. Emily trusts him or is told to, and no one else is close enough to see what's really happening. I sat back in my chair, the weight of her words pressing down on me. It made sense. Too much sense. But Emily sent that message, I said quietly. It came from her. Marlene nodded. I'm not saying she didn't, she said. But that doesn't mean the idea started with her, or that she fully understands the consequences. I thought about Emily's face at the pharmacy, the way she avoided eye contact, the quick explanations, the tension in her voice. She looked nervous, I said, like she was trying to hold everything together. Marlene's expression softened slightly. That's what worries me the most, she said. Because if she's under pressure, financial, emotional, or both, she might not even realize how deep it goes. I felt my chest tighten. So what do? I asked. For the first time since I had walked in, Marlene didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at me carefully. What you don't do, she said, is rush back in and fix everything. I nodded slowly. I wasn't planning to, I said. Good, she replied. Because if you do, you'll just cover it up again. Whatever is happening will stay hidden, and the pattern will continue. I knew she was right. It just didn't make it easier. So I just... Watch, I asked. Not passively, she said, but intentionally. Pay attention. Stay available, but on your terms. And when Emily is ready to see what's really happening, she'll need you to be clear-headed, not emotionally entangled. I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. "And Brian?" I asked. Marlene's expression sharpened slightly. "Brian is going to show you exactly who he is," she said. "You just have to stop looking at him through the lens of who you hoped he was." The room fell quiet after that. I sat there absorbing everything she had said, feeling a strange mix of clarity and unease. Because for the first time, I wasn't just reacting to events. I was beginning to understand them. And understanding changes things. It shifts the way you see people, the way you interpret their actions, the way you respond. When I left Marlene's house later that afternoon, the sky had started to cloud over the air heavier than it had been earlier. I drove home slowly, my mind still turning over everything we had discussed. By the time I pulled into my driveway, one thing was clear. I wasn't going to ignore this anymore. I wasn't going to jump in and fix it either, but I was going to watch. Carefully. Because whatever was happening in Emily's house, it wasn't random. It wasn't temporary. It was a pattern, and patterns don't disappear on their own. They build. They tighten. Until eventually, something forces them into the open. Ethan's birthday fell on a warm Saturday in early October, the kind of day where the air still carried a trace of summer, but the leaves had already begun to turn. Emily texted me a week in advance. "We're having a small party for Ethan next Saturday. You're welcome to come." Welcome. Not "we'd love for you to be there." Not "Ethan really wants you there." Just welcome. I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. "I'll be there." If nothing else, I wanted to see him smile. And maybe I'll admit I wanted to see what things looked like from the inside now that I was no longer part of the structure holding it all together. When I arrived that afternoon, the house looked exactly as it always had, neatly kept a few balloons tied to the mailbox, colorful streamers taped around the front door. From the outside, it looked like a perfectly normal celebration, but the moment I stepped inside, I felt it, the shift. Not obvious. Not something anyone else would notice, but I did, because I had known this house when it was relaxed, when it breathed easily. Now it felt staged. Ethan spotted me first. "Grandma!" he shouted, running across the room before anyone else could react. He wrapped his arms around me, his energy bright and genuine in a way that cut through everything else. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said, hugging him tightly. "I brought you something." His eyes lit up as I handed him the gift, but before he could open it, Emily stepped in gently. "Let's wait until cake time, okay?" she said, her voice soft but firm. Ethan nodded, though I could tell he wanted to tear into it immediately. "Okay," he said, setting it carefully on the table. I looked up at Emily. She smiled at me, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thanks for coming," she said. "Of course," I replied. There was a brief pause, like we were both aware of everything that hadn't been said between us. Then Brian appeared. "Megan," he said, his tone smooth, his expression perfectly composed. "Glad you could make it." There it was again, that polite distance. "Wouldn't miss it," I said. He nodded, then gestured toward the living room. "We've got some snacks set up. Help yourself." I thanked him and moved further inside, taking in the space as I went. At first glance, everything looked festive. There were decorations, a table filled with food, a few other parents chatting near the windows. But as I walked through the house, something else caught my attention. Changes. Subtle but noticeable. The television in the living room had been upgraded again, larger, sleeker than the one I remembered. The sound system beneath it looked new too. In the corner, there was a set of patio furniture visible through the sliding glass door, high-end, the kind you didn't buy on impulse. Near the entryway, a pair of designer sneakers sat neatly lined up beside Brian's shoes. I slowed my steps slightly, letting my eyes take it all in. These weren't the signs of a family struggling to keep up with bills. These were choices, intentional ones. I made my way into the kitchen where Emily was arranging plates. "Need any help?" I asked. She hesitated, then shook her head. "No. I've got it," she said quickly. "That used to be my role. To step in to assist, to take over when needed. Now there was no space for that. So I nodded and stepped back. "I'll stay out of your way," I said lightly. She glanced at me, something flickering in her expression. "That's not what I meant," she said a little too quickly. I gave her a small, understanding smile. "It's okay," I said. "I know." She looked like she wanted to say something else, but then Brian's voice called from the other room. "Emily, can you come here for a second?" She straightened immediately. "Coming," she replied, then turned back to me. "Excuse me." I watched her go, noticing the way her shoulders tightened slightly as she walked toward him. The party continued around me. Children ran through the house laughing and shouting. Parents chatted about school schedules and weekend plans. Music played softly in the background. On the surface, everything was normal, but underneath it, there was a tension I couldn't ignore. At one point, I found myself standing near a group of parents I didn't know very well. They were talking about home renovations, vacation plans, the usual things. Brian joined the conversation, slipping into it effortlessly. "We've been focusing on building things our own way lately," he said casually. "Trying to be more independent, you know." Someone nodded. "That's important," another parent said. "Family support is great, but you've got to stand on your own eventually." Brian smiled. "Exactly," he said. "It's easy to rely too much on outside help. At some point, you have to draw boundaries." I felt the words land even though they weren't directed at me. Not directly, but they didn't need to be. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Emily standing a few feet away, her hands clasped together. Her expression carefully neutral. She didn't speak. She didn't correct him. She just stood there. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. This wasn't just happening inside their home. It was being shaped, presented to the outside world. A narrative. One where they were strong, independent, self-sufficient. And where I, whether explicitly or not, was part of what they had to outgrow. I turned away from the conversation, my chest tightening slightly. Ethan found me a few minutes later, tugging on my sleeve. "Grandma, come see," he said, pulling me toward the backyard. I let him lead me, grateful for the distraction. Outside, the patio was set up with a small table for cake surrounded by decorations and chairs. I paused for a moment, taking in the furniture again. It was expensive. There was no mistaking it. "Do you like it?" Ethan asked, following my gaze. "It's very nice," I said. "Dad got it," he said proudly. "He said we needed something better for guests." Guests. The word echoed in my mind. That's what I was now. Not part of the household, not part of the foundation. A guest. We went through the motions of the party cake, candles, gifts. When Ethan opened mine, his face lit up exactly the way I had hoped it would. "Thank you, Grandma," he said, hugging me again. That moment made everything else fade just for a second, but not completely. Because as the party wound down and people began to leave, I overheard something that stopped me in my tracks. I had stepped back into the house to grab my purse when I heard Brian's voice from the hallway. "We're just trying to keep things balanced," he was saying. It's not healthy when someone else is always stepping in. It creates the wrong kind of dependency. Another voice responded, though I couldn't see who it was. Yeah, I get that. Brian continued, his tone measured. Sometimes you have to set boundaries even if it's uncomfortable, especially with family. I stood there just out of sight, my hand tightening around the strap of my purse. He wasn't just setting boundaries, he was defining the story, and in that story I wasn't the mother who had supported them. I was the problem they had to overcome. I stepped out into the hallway, then letting my presence be known. Brian turned, his expression shifting for just a fraction of a second before settling back into its usual calm. Megan, he said. Heading out, yes, I replied evenly. I think it's time. Emily appeared behind him, her eyes flicking between us. Thank you for coming, she said softly. Of course, I said. I looked at her for a moment longer than usual, just hoping she might say something more. But she didn't. So I nodded, turned, and walked out the door. As I drove home, the image of that house stayed with me. The decorations, the laughter, the polished conversations, and beneath it all, the cracks. Because now I could see them clearly, and more importantly, I could see how carefully they were being hidden. The rain started just after sunset. Not a storm, not the kind that rattles windows or demands attention. Just a steady, quiet rainfall that blurred the streetlights and softened everything outside my house. I had just finished washing the dishes when the doorbell rang. At first, I thought I had imagined it. No one came by unannounced anymore. Not since I stepped back. But then it rang again. I dried my hands slowly, my heart beginning to pick up in a way I couldn't quite explain, and walked toward the door. When I opened it, Emily was standing there. Her hair was damp from the rain strands clinging to her face. She wasn't holding an umbrella. Her arms were wrapped tightly around herself as if she were trying to stay warm or hold herself together. Emily, I said, my voice soft with surprise. What? Before I could finish, she stepped forward. Mom, Her voice broke. That was all it took. I reached out immediately, pulling her into the house and closing the door behind us. The moment the door shut, she collapsed into me, her body shaking with quiet, uncontrollable sobs. I can't do this anymore, she whispered. I held her, my arms tightening instinctively around her shoulders, one hand gently resting on the back of her head, like I had done when she was a child. It's okay, I murmured. You're safe here. Take your time. We stood there in the entryway for a long moment, the only sound the soft rhythm of her crying and the rain tapping against the windows. Eventually, I guided her to the couch and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. I went to the kitchen, poured her a glass of water, and brought it back. She took it with trembling hands. Thank you, she said quietly. I sat across from her, not too close, giving her space, but staying present. What happened? I asked gently. She let out a shaky breath, staring down at the glass in her hands. I don't even know where to start, she said. Start anywhere, I replied. There was a long pause. Then slowly the words began to come. He's been different, she said. Or maybe he's always been this way, and I just didn't see it. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. At first it was small things, she continued, comments about how we needed to be more independent, how relying on you made us look weak. He said it wasn't healthy for our marriage if I kept turning to you for everything. I nodded slightly, encouraging her to go on. I thought he was right, she said, her voice tightening. I mean, I didn't want to be the kind of person who couldn't stand on her own, and you've done so much for us, Mom. I didn't want him to feel like he didn't matter. My chest ached, but I kept my voice steady. So you agreed with him? I said. She nodded. At first, yeah. I started trying to do things differently, not calling you as much, handling things myself. But every time I tried to talk to him about money or bills or anything like that, he'd get defensive. How I asked. Her fingers tightened around the glass. He'd say I didn't trust him, she said, that I was questioning him, that I didn't understand how hard he was working for us. I felt a familiar tension settle in my chest, and the text I asked carefully. She closed her eyes for a moment. That night, we had a fight, she said. A bad one. I waited. He found out I had called you earlier that week, she continued. I didn't even ask you for anything, I just talked to you, and he got so upset. He said I was going behind his back, that I was choosing you over him. Her voice cracked again. He told me if I wanted our marriage to work, I had to set clear boundaries, that I had to show him he came first. The words landed heavily between us. So you sent the message, I said quietly. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I didn't want to, she whispered. But he wouldn't let it go. He kept saying things over and over until I just gave in. I thought if I did what he asked, things would calm down. I felt a slow, controlled anger rise inside me, but I kept it in check. And did they? I asked. She let out a bitter, humorless laugh. No, she said. It got worse. How I asked gently. She shook her head, her eyes filling again. He started getting more controlling, she said. Not just about you, about everything. Where I went, what I spent, who I talked to. I leaned forward slightly, my focus entirely on her. Emily, what about the money I asked carefully? Her expression shifted. That was where it hurt the most. I don't even know what's real anymore, she admitted. He handles everything. The accounts, the bills, all of it. Every time I ask questions, he tells me not to worry, that he's got it under control. And do you believe him? I asked. She hesitated. I used to, she said. But then, things stopped adding up. My heart skipped. What do you mean? She swallowed hard. We keep running out of money, she said. Even after everything you've given us. There's always something, some bill, some emergency, some reason why we're short again. I nodded slowly. I've noticed that I said. Her eyes widened slightly as if she hadn't expected me to say it out loud. I tried to look at the accounts once she continued, just to understand what was going on. But he got so angry. He said I was invading his privacy, that I didn't need to see everything. That's not normal. Emily, I said gently. I know, she whispered. I know that now. She set the glass down on the coffee table, her hands trembling. And there's more, she said. I braced myself. He's been spending money, she continued, on things I didn't even know about. That furniture outside the new TV, I didn't approve any of that. He just bought them. I thought back to the party, the expensive upgrades, the disconnect between their struggles and their lifestyle. How is he paying for it? I asked. She shook her head. I don't know, she said. And that's what scares me. The room fell quiet for a moment, the weight of her words settling between us. I thought pushing you away would help, she said finally, her voice breaking again. I thought if I just did what he wanted, everything would go back to normal. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with regret. But it didn't, she whispered. It just made everything worse. I reached across the space between us and took her hand. "You're here now," I said softly. "That's what matters." She squeezed my hand tightly as if holding on to something she had almost lost. "I didn't know who else to come to," she admitted. My heart ached at that. "You can always come to me," I said. "No matter what." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks again. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she looked at me, her expression shifting from pain to something else. "Fear, Mom," she said quietly. "Yes, I think he's hiding something." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. And in that moment, everything I had been sensing, everything I had been piecing together finally aligned. This wasn't just tension. This wasn't just control. This was something deeper, something dangerous. And it was no longer hidden. It was right in front of us. I didn't answer Emily right away. Not because I didn't believe her, but because I needed to steady myself before I said anything that would push her into panic instead of clarity. She was already shaken, already questioning things she had trusted for years. If I met that fear with my own, it would only make everything worse. So I took a slow breath, keeping my voice calm. "Tell me what makes you think that," I said gently. Emily pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders as if she suddenly felt cold. "It's not just one thing," she said. "It's everything together. The way he reacts when I ask questions, the way money keeps disappearing, the way nothing ever quite makes sense when I try to look at it closely." I nodded, encouraging her to keep going. "And then there are the things I've found," she added, her voice dropping. My attention sharpened. "What things?" She hesitated, like she was deciding whether to say it out loud. "I found emails," she said finally, "on his laptop. He left it open one night and I wasn't even looking for anything, I just saw them." "What kind of emails?" I asked. Her fingers twisted together in her lap. "Something about inventory," she said. "Orders, payments, shipping delays, but not from any company I recognize. It didn't look like a normal job. It looked like something else." My mind immediately went back to the phone call I had overheard weeks earlier. The low, tense voice. The abrupt ending when he noticed me. "Did you ask him about it?" I said. She let out a short, humorless breath. "I tried," she said. "He told me it was just a side business, that he was trying to build something extra for us, that I wouldn't understand the details." "And did that explanation satisfy you?" I asked. She shook her head. "No," she said. "Because if it was something normal, why hide it? Why get angry when I ask questions I didn't answer? Because the answer was already clear. And then there's the credit card," she added. My chest tightened slightly. "What about it?" She swallowed. "I got a notification last week," she said, "about a payment being due. But it wasn't a card I use. It was in my name. But I didn't recognize the account." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "You didn't open it?" I asked carefully. "No," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "At least, I don't remember opening it." I leaned forward slightly. "Emily, listen to me," I said, keeping my tone steady. "Have you ever signed anything, any paperwork, without fully reading it?" "Anything Brian asked you to sign?" She closed her eyes for a moment. "Yes," she admitted. "A few times. He said it was for refinancing something or setting up accounts. I didn't think it was a big deal." I exhaled slowly. "That's likely where it came from," I said. Her eyes opened again wide with realization. "You think he used my name?" she asked. "I think it's possible," I said carefully. "And if he did, it means he's been taking on debt that you're legally tied to. The room fell completely silent. Emily stared at me, her face draining of color. "Oh my God," she whispered. I reached out, placing my hand over hers. "Hey," I said softly, "we don't know everything yet. We're going to figure this out step by step, okay?" She nodded, but I could see the fear settling deeper now. And there's something else she said after a moment. I waited. "He's been moving money around," she said. "I don't have full access, but I've seen notifications transfers between accounts I don't recognize. And every time I ask, he says it's just part of managing cash flow." I exchanged a glance with her, even though she wasn't looking directly at me. Cash flow, inventory, shipping. It was starting to form a picture. "What kind of business does he say he's running?" I asked. "Online resale," she said. "Buying and selling products, electronics, sometimes clothing. He says it's all legal, just complicated." I nodded slowly. "And is it profitable?" I asked. She let out a bitter laugh. "That's the thing," she said. "It's always about to be. There's always a deal that's going to turn things around. A shipment that's going to make everything better, but it never actually does." I felt a familiar anger begin to rise. Not loud, not explosive, but steady and controlled. The kind that comes from seeing a pattern clearly. "He's using your money to cover losses," I said quietly. Emily looked at me, her expression breaking. "And your money too," she added. The words landed harder than I expected. For a moment I didn't speak, because she was right. Every check I had written, every transfer I had made, every emergency I had helped them through, it hadn't been solving their problems. It had been feeding them, feeding something I hadn't been allowed to see. I thought I was helping, I said more to myself than to her. "You were," Emily said quickly. "You were helping me." I just didn't realize what was really happening behind it. I nodded slowly. "That's not your fault," I said. But part of me knew. I had ignored the signs, because it was easier to believe I was making things better. Emily leaned forward, her hands covering her face. "I feel so stupid," she whispered. "How did I not see this?" I reached out gently, pulling her hands away. "You're not stupid," I said firmly. "You trusted your husband. That's not a flaw. That's what marriage is supposed to be built on." Her eyes filled with tears again. "But he lied to me," she said. "Yes," I said quietly. "It sounds like he did." The truth settled between us, heavy and undeniable. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I shifted slightly, my tone becoming more focused. "Okay," I said. "We need to think about what comes next." Emily looked at me, her expression uncertain. "What do we do?" she asked. I took a slow breath. "First, we don't panic," I said. "We gather information. We figure out exactly what's going on before we make any decisions." She nodded, though I could tell it was hard for her to stay calm. "Second," I continued, "we make sure you're protected. Legally, financially, everything." Her eyes widened slightly. "You mean a lawyer?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "A good one. Someone who understands family law and financial issues. Someone who can help you see what your options are." She hesitated. "Won't that make things worse?" she asked. "It might," I said honestly, "but ignoring it won't make it better." She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting together again. "And Brian?" she asked quietly. I held her gaze. "Brian is going to react," I said. "But right now our focus isn't on him. It's on you." She nodded slowly. For the first time since she arrived, there was a small shift in her posture. Not relief, but something close to grounding, like she had moved from confusion into something more solid. "I don't want to keep living like this," she said. "You don't have to," I replied. She looked at me, her eyes searching. "Are you mad at me?" she asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. "For the text," she added. "For pushing you away." I shook my head gently. "No," I said. "I'm not mad." She frowned slightly. Not even a little. I allowed myself a small, honest smile. "I was hurt," I said, "but I understand now." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks again. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I reached out and pulled her into a hug. "I know," I said softly. We stayed like that for a moment, the tension in her body slowly easing. And as I held her, one thing became clear in a way it hadn't before. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth. It was about what that truth meant. Because the moment Emily fully saw it, everything would change, and there would be no going back. Not to the version of her marriage she thought she had, not to the version of our relationship that had existed before. The illusion was already breaking. Now it was only a matter of time before it shattered completely. That night, after Emily finally fell asleep in the guest room, I sat alone at the kitchen table with a notebook in front of me. I hadn't done this in years, written things down, organized my thoughts like they needed structure instead of emotion. But something about the situation demanded it. Not panic, not reaction, clarity. Because if there was one thing I understood now, it was this rushing in the way I used to would only make things worse. I wasn't going to rescue Emily. I was going to help her stand. There was a difference. And this time, it mattered. The next morning, Emily came into the kitchen looking like she hadn't slept much, but there was something steadier in her expression. The raw panic from the night before had softened into something more focused. "How are you feeling?" I asked, sliding a cup of coffee toward her. She wrapped her hands around it as if grounding herself. "Better," she said. "Not good, but clearer." I nodded. "That's a start." She sat down across from me, glancing at the notebook. "What's that?" she asked. "A plan," I said simply. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "You've already made a plan?" she asked. I allowed myself a small smile. "I've had a few decades of practice dealing with difficult situations," I said. "This isn't my first one." That seemed to ease something in her. "Okay," she said. "What do we do?" I turned the notebook toward her. "First," I said, tapping the top of the page, "we gather information. Not guesses, not assumptions. Facts." She nodded. "Everything you can access," I continued. "Bank statements, credit cards, loan documents, emails, anything that shows where money is going and where it's coming from." Her expression tightened slightly. "I don't have access to everything," she admitted. "I know," I said. "But you have more access than you think. Start with what you do have. Notifications, old statements, even small pieces can add up." She nodded again, more firmly this time. "Okay. Second," I said, "we protect you." She looked at me, her brow furrowing. "How?" "By making sure you understand your legal position," I said. "What's in your name? What you're responsible for? What your options are." She hesitated. "That's where the lawyer comes in," she said. "Yes," I replied. She took a slow breath. "That makes it real," she said quietly. "It already is," I said gently. "We're just choosing to face it." She looked down at her coffee, silent for a moment. "And the third step?" she asked. I paused. "Because this was the hardest part. The third step," I said carefully, "is that I help you, but not the way I used to." She looked up, confusion flickering across her face. What do you mean? I met her gaze directly. I'm not going to step in and fix everything I said. I'm not going to cover debts or smooth things over so it all looks manageable again. Her eyes widened slightly. Mom, I'm not asking you to. I know, I said, gently cutting her off. But I need to say it anyway. For both of us. She fell quiet. I've spent years making things easier. I continued, and without realizing it, I also made it easier for this situation to stay hidden. Her expression softened, guilt creeping in. You were trying to help, she said. I agreed, but helping isn't always the same as doing what's best. She didn't argue, because deep down she knew it was true. So what does helping look like now? She asked. I leaned forward slightly. It looks like support, I said. Guidance. Standing beside you while you make decisions, not making them for you. She nodded slowly. And if things get bad? She asked quietly. I reached across the table and took her hand. Then we face it, I said. Together. But honestly, she squeezed my hand, her grip tightening. Okay, she said. For the first time, there was something solid in her voice. Not fear, not confusion, determination. Later that afternoon, I made a call. Lisa Grant's office, a receptionist, answered. Hi, I said. I'd like to schedule a consultation. Lisa Grant was a family law attorney I had heard about through Marlene. Experienced, thorough, not easily swayed by emotional stories. She dealt in facts. Exactly what we needed. We secured an appointment for the following day. When I told Emily, she looked nervous, but she didn't back out. That alone told me how far she had already come. The next morning, we drove to the office together. The building was modern, but understated, the kind of place that didn't try to impress you with luxury, just quiet professionalism. Emily's hands were clasped tightly in her lap during the drive. Hey, I said, gently glancing over at her. You're doing the right thing. She nodded, though her expression remained tense. I know, she said. It just feels like everything is about to change. It is, I said honestly. She turned to look at me. And that's okay, I added. That seemed to steady her just a little. The consultation room was simple, a table, a few chairs, a stack of files neatly arranged on one side. Lisa Grant entered a few minutes later. She was in her late 40s, composed, direct, with the kind of presence that made you feel both seen and assessed at the same time. Megan, she said, shaking my hand. And you must be Emily. Emily nodded. Thank you for seeing us, she said. Of course, Lisa replied, taking a seat. Why don't you tell me what's going on? Emily glanced at me briefly. I gave her a small nod. This was her moment, and she stepped into it. At first, her voice was quiet, slightly uncertain. But as she continued explaining the finances, the hidden accounts, the credit card in her name, Brian's reactions, her tone grew steadier, stronger. By the time she finished, the room was quiet. Lisa leaned back slightly, her expression thoughtful. Okay, she said. There are a few things we need to clarify. She turned to Emily. First, anything in your name you are legally responsible for. That includes credit cards, loans, and any jointly held accounts. Emily swallowed. Even if I didn't fully understand what I was signing, she asked. Lisa nodded. Yes, she said. But that doesn't mean you don't have options. It just means we need to act carefully. Emily nodded slowly. Second, Lisa continued, we need documentation. Everything you can access. The more information we have, the stronger your position will be. She paused, then added, and third, You need to prepare for the possibility that your husband will not respond well when this is brought into the open. Emily's shoulders tensed slightly. I figured, she said. Lisa's gaze softened just a fraction. This isn't about assuming the worst, she said. It's about being ready for it. I watched Emily closely. There was fear in her eyes, but there was something else now, too. Awareness. The kind that can't be undone. When the meeting ended, we walked back to the car in silence. Emily opened the passenger door, then paused. "This is real," she said quietly. I nodded. "Yes." She looked at me. "And I'm not going back," she added. There was no hesitation in her voice this time. No uncertainty. Just a quiet, steady decision. I felt something shift inside me as I heard it. Not relief, not yet, but something close. Because for the first time, she wasn't looking for someone to fix it. She was choosing to face it. And that changed everything. The shift didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic announcement, no immediate confrontation where everything came spilling out in a single moment. Instead, it began quietly, deliberately. Emily went back home 2 days after meeting with Lisa Grant. Not because things were resolved, but because, as Lisa had advised, she needed to gather more information before making any permanent decisions. "I'll be careful," she told me before she left. "I won't push too hard. I just need to understand what's really going on." I believed her, because I could see the difference now. This wasn't the same Emily who had sent that text in the grocery store. This was someone who had started to see clearly. And once that happens, it's very hard to go back to not seeing. The first few days passed without incident. Emily texted me small updates. I checked one of the accounts. There are transfers I don't recognize. He asked why I was looking at statements. I told him I was organizing things. He didn't like that. Each message was short, controlled, but I could feel the tension underneath. Then on the 4th night, everything shifted. My phone rang just after 9 p.m. It was Emily. I answered immediately. "Hey," I said. "Are you okay?" There was no greeting on the other end. "He knows," she said. My grip on the phone tightened. "What do you mean?" "He knows I've been looking into the accounts," she said, her voice low and tight. I didn't even tell him directly, he just figured it out. "What happened?" I asked. There was a pause, like she was replaying it in her mind. "I was on my laptop," she said, going through some of the statements I managed to access. He came up behind me and asked what I was doing. "And what did you say?" I asked. "I told him I was organizing our finances," she said, "that I wanted to understand things better. I could already feel where this was going, and I prompted." "He didn't believe me," she said. Her voice shook slightly now. He started asking questions. Why now? Why suddenly? What had changed? And then, "He brought you up." "Of course he did." "What did he say?" I asked. "He said you've been putting ideas in my head," she replied. "That you've always had a problem with him. That you've been waiting for a chance to turn me against him." I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying myself. "And how did you respond?" I asked carefully. "I told him that wasn't true," she said. "That this was about me wanting to understand our finances. But he just kept pushing." Her breathing became uneven. "He said I was being ungrateful, that he's been working nonstop to provide for us, and this is how I repay him, by questioning him like he's some kind of criminal." The word hung in the air. Criminal. And then I asked. There was a long pause. Then she said quietly, "He got angry. Not just upset. Not just defensive. Angry." "What did he do?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "He didn't yell," she said. "Not at first. He just changed." His whole tone shifted. He started talking slower, colder. A chill ran through me. He said if I didn't trust him, then maybe I shouldn't be in the marriage at all, she continued. My chest tightened. And how did that make you feel? I asked. Like I was being tested, she said. Like I had to choose my words carefully or everything would explode. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. That's not a healthy dynamic, Emily, I said gently. I know, she whispered. There was a moment of silence. Then she added, but that's not even the worst part. I felt my stomach drop slightly. What happened next? He started going through my phone, she said. I straightened in my seat. He what? He asked to see it, she said quickly. Said if I had nothing to hide, it shouldn't be a problem, and I didn't know what to do. Did you give it to him? I asked. She hesitated. Yes, she admitted. I didn't want to escalate things. I closed my eyes briefly, fighting the urge to react emotionally. And what was he looking for? I asked. You, she said. The word came out barely above a whisper. He went through my messages, my call logs, everything, she continued. And when he saw that I had been talking to you more, he just snapped. What do you mean? I asked. He accused me of betraying him, she said, of going behind his back, of letting you interfere in our marriage again. I felt a slow, controlled anger build in my chest. And what did you say? I asked. I told him I needed support, she said, that I was confused, that things didn't make sense, and I just needed someone to talk to. And how did he respond? He said I should be talking to him, she said, that bringing you into it was disrespectful. I let out a slow breath. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about control. Emily, I said carefully, you're allowed to have support. You're allowed to talk to your own mother. I know, she said quickly. I know that now. But in that moment, it felt like I was doing something wrong. That's how manipulation works, I said gently. It makes you question things that should be obvious. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, it didn't stop there. I braced myself. He started asking about the lawyer, she said. My heart skipped. What did you tell him? I told him I hadn't seen one, she said quickly. I didn't think it was the right time to tell him the truth. That was a smart decision, I said. I didn't feel smart, she admitted. I felt like I was lying just to protect myself. That's not lying, I said softly. That's being careful. She let out a shaky breath. He's watching me now, she said. I can feel it. Every question I ask, every move I make. He's paying attention. I leaned forward slightly, my focus sharpening. Okay, I said. Listen to me carefully. Okay, you need to stay calm, I said. Don't confront him directly. Not yet. Keep gathering information, but do it quietly, and if you ever feel unsafe emotionally or otherwise, you leave. Immediately. I will, she said. There was a pause. Then more quietly she added, Mom, I'm scared. The words hit me harder than anything else she had said, not because they were surprising, but because they were honest. I know, I said gently, but you're not alone in this. You hear me? I do, she said. And you're stronger than you think, I added. She didn't respond right away, but I could feel her holding on to the words. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand. Everything was moving faster now. The cracks weren't just showing anymore, they were widening. And Brian wasn't losing control quietly. He was tightening his grip, which meant one thing. The truth was getting too close. And when people like him feel that happening, they don't step back. They push harder. The question was, how far would he go? Before everything finally broke. By the following week, everything reached a point where it could no longer be contained behind careful conversations and quiet observations. The truth didn't explode. It surfaced, piece by piece. And once it did, there was no way to push it back down. It started with a phone call Emily didn't expect. She told me about it later, her voice still carrying the weight of that moment. It was a creditor, she said. I almost didn't answer because I didn't recognize the number, but she had, and that single decision changed everything. They asked for me by name, she continued, said they were calling about an overdue balance on an account. My chest tightened as I listened. What account, I asked. That's the thing she said. I didn't recognize it. At all. The representative gave her details an account opened nearly a year ago. A line of credit that had been steadily used, payments made inconsistently, balances shifting in ways that suggested someone was trying to keep it from collapsing completely. And it was in your name, I asked. Yes, she said. Fully. My name, my information, everything. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the reality of it settle. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was evidence. What did you do? I asked. I didn't say much, she replied. Just asked for documentation. Statements, account history, everything they could send me. That was the right move, I said. She let out a shaky breath. I didn't feel like it, she admitted. I felt like my entire life had just shifted under my feet. I understood that feeling more than she knew. Because when trust breaks at that level, it doesn't just affect one area. It changes everything. Later that same day, something else happened. Something that forced the situation into the open. Brian's brother, Daniel Carter, came into the picture. Daniel had always been different from Brian. Quieter, more grounded. The kind of person who didn't speak much, but when he did, it mattered. He had been helping Brian occasionally with what Brian called his business. Nothing formal, just advice, occasional conversations, small involvement. But unlike Emily, Daniel asked questions. And unlike me, he had access. Emily told me that Daniel showed up at their house unannounced that afternoon. I didn't know he was coming, she said. Brian looked surprised too. That alone told me something. What happened? I asked. They went into the office, she said. Closed the door. I could hear them talking, but I couldn't make out everything. Her voice tightened slightly, but then it got louder. I leaned forward, listening closely. What were they arguing about? Money, she said, and something about shipments that never arrived, orders that were already paid for. A cold feeling settled in my chest. Go on, I said. Daniel kept asking where the money had gone. She continued. Why certain accounts didn't match up. Why there were gaps in the records. And Brian? I asked. At first he tried to brush it off, she said. Said it was just temporary issues. Delays, miscommunications. I could picture it perfectly. The calm tone, the controlled explanations, the performance. But Daniel didn't buy it, she added. Of course he didn't. And then I asked. Emily swallowed. Then Brian got defensive, she said. Really defensive. He started raising his voice, saying Daniel didn't understand how the business worked, that he was overstepping. I nodded slowly. That's when people start losing control, I said quietly. Yeah, she said. I think so too. There was a pause. Then she added, at one point Daniel said something that made everything go quiet. What did he say? I asked. Emily's voice dropped. He said, this isn't a business problem. This is a debt problem. The words hit hard. because they cut straight through everything. No more explanations, no more excuses, just the truth. "What happened after that?" I asked. Emily let out a slow breath. "Brian didn't answer," she said. "Not right away." And that silence, it said more than anything he could have said. I could imagine it. The moment where the story stops holding, where reality pushes through. And then Daniel asked him directly. She continued, "How much are you in for?" I held my breath slightly, and I prompted. Emily's voice trembled. "Brian tried to minimize it," she said. "At first, said it wasn't that bad, that he had a plan to fix it." I felt that familiar anger rise again. "And the real number?" I asked. There was a long pause. "6 figures," she said quietly. The room around me felt suddenly smaller. "Over $100,000, I asked. "Yes," she said. I closed my eyes briefly. That wasn't a mistake. That wasn't mismanagement. That was a system. How, I asked. "Bad deals," she said. "Buying inventory that didn't sell. Trying to recover losses by taking bigger risks. Using credit to cover gaps." I nodded slowly. "A spiral. The kind that feeds itself." "And the account's in your name?" I asked. Her voice cracked. "He admitted it," she said. "Said he needed more credit and it was easier to use mine." I felt my hands tighten slightly. "Did he tell you before?" I asked. "No," she said. "He said he was going to tell me once things stabilized." "Of course he did. They always say that. Was he ever planning to?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Silence can be very clear. "What happened next?" I asked. Emily exhaled slowly. "Daniel didn't yell," she said. "He just looked at him, like he didn't recognize him anymore." That image stayed with me, because sometimes disappointment is louder than anger. "And Brian?" I asked. "He started justifying it," she said, "saying he did it for us, for the family, that he was trying to build something bigger." I let out a quiet breath. "That's not building," I said. "That's gambling." "I know," she said softly. There was a pause. Then she added, "And then Daniel said something else." "What?" He said, "You didn't just risk your own money. You risked hers, without telling her." My chest tightened again, and Brian didn't deny it. She continued. "He just stood there. That was it. That was the moment, the one where everything became undeniable. The illusion, the story, the version of reality Brian had been maintaining for so long. It was gone. Not slowly, not gently. Gone." "What did you do?" I asked. "I stood there," she said, listening to all of it, and for the first time, I saw him clearly. There was no hesitation in her voice now. No confusion, just clarity. "He wasn't protecting us," she said. "He was protecting himself." I nodded even though she couldn't see me. "Yes," I said quietly. There was a long silence between us. Then she said something that told me everything I needed to know. "I'm done, Mom." The words were calm, steady, final. And in that moment, the story didn't feel uncertain anymore. It felt like it had reached its turning point, because the truth wasn't hidden anymore. It was out, fully. And once that happens, everything that comes after is no longer about discovery. It's about decision. And Emily had just made hers. When Emily said, "I'm done," it didn't sound dramatic. It didn't sound like the kind of declaration people make in the heat of anger or heartbreak. It sounded quiet, certain. And that was how I knew it was real. Because the loudest decisions are often the least stable. The quiet ones, the ones that come after clarity, those are the ones that hold. What does that mean? I asked her gently. It wasn't a challenge. It was an invitation. She took a slow breath before answering. It means I'm not staying in this situation anymore, she said. Not like this. Not with lies. Not with debt I didn't agree to. Not with someone who makes me feel like I'm the problem for asking questions. I felt something in my chest loosen slightly. Not relief, but recognition. She had crossed a line internally. And once you cross that line, there's no going back to pretending. Have you told him I asked? No, she said. Not yet. Do you plan to? She hesitated for a moment. Yes, she said finally. But I'm not going to do it impulsively. I want to do it the right way. I nodded. That's smart, because walking away isn't just emotional, it's logistical, legal, financial, especially when there's a child involved. What's your next step? I asked. I'm going to meet with Lisa again, she said. Go over everything we know now, figure out what separation looks like, what I'm responsible for, what I'm not. I nodded. And Ethan? I asked softly. Her expression softened immediately. He comes first, she said. Always. I believed her, because despite everything that had never changed, he's been quieter lately, she added. He hears more than he should. My chest tightened slightly. I know I said. He told me some things. She closed her eyes briefly. I hate that he's caught in the middle of this, she whispered. He won't always be, I said gently. But right now, the best thing you can do for him is be steady, she nodded. I'm trying. We talked for a while longer, going over details. What she needed to gather, what conversations she needed to have, what steps she needed to take before anything became official. But underneath all of it, there was something else. A shift in how we were talking to each other. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't leading, and she wasn't following. We were standing side by side. Two women, facing the same reality, making decisions together. Later that evening, after we hung up, I sat in my living room, the quiet wrapping around me in a way that felt different than it had before. Not empty, not heavy, just still. And for the first time since that message in the grocery store, I allowed myself to think about what had actually happened. Not just the events, but the meaning behind them. Because stepping back hadn't just changed their situation, it had changed me. For years, I had believed that love meant being there no matter what. Fixing things, smoothing things over, carrying whatever needed to be carried so the people I loved didn't have to struggle. But what I hadn't realized was that sometimes that kind of love creates a kind of blindness. Not intentional, not malicious, but real. Because when you're always solving problems, you don't always see why they keep happening. You don't always ask who's creating them. You don't always notice the patterns. You just keep stepping in, and in doing that, you can unknowingly protect the very thing that's causing the harm. That was the part that was hardest to accept. Not what Brian had done, but what I had allowed without realizing it. By the time Emily came over the next day, there was something different about her, not just in what she said, but in how she carried herself. She looked grounded. Tired, yes, but clear. I talked to Lisa this morning, she said as she stepped inside. How did it go? I asked. She confirmed everything Emily replied. The accounts, the debt, the fact that some of it is legally tied to me. I nodded slowly. And she said I have options, Emily continued. But I need to act carefully. Document everything. Don't confront him without a plan, and most importantly, don't let him control the narrative anymore. That last part stayed with me, because that's exactly what he had been doing, shaping the story, defining the roles, making himself the provider, making her the dependent, making me the problem. But that story was over now. "What are you going to do?" I asked. Emily took a breath. "I'm going to separate," she said. "Not just emotionally, legally." The word hung in the air, heavy, final. I studied her face. There was no hesitation there. Just resolve. "Are you ready for what that means?" I asked gently. "No," she said honestly, "but I'm ready for what staying would mean if I don't." I nodded. That was the right answer, because no one is ever fully ready for a decision like that. They just reach a point where the alternative becomes impossible. We spent the afternoon going through practical steps, what she needed to pack, what documents she needed, copies of how to handle communication with Brian moving forward. It wasn't emotional, not in the way I expected. It was focused, deliberate, like she had shifted into a different mode entirely. At one point, she paused and looked at me. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." "Why didn't you push back?" she asked, "when I sent that message. Why didn't you argue or come over anyway or try to convince me I was wrong?" I thought about it for a moment. Because the honest answer wasn't simple. "I wanted to," I said. "More than you know." She nodded slightly, but I realized something. I continued. "If I fought you on it, you would have defended your decision even if it wasn't fully yours, and nothing would have changed." She was quiet, listening. "So instead I said, I gave you exactly what you asked for." "And that changed everything," she said softly. "Yes," I replied. She looked down at her hands. "I hated you for a little while," she admitted. The words didn't hurt the way they might have before. "I know," I said gently, "but..." She continued, her voice shifting. "If you hadn't stopped, I don't think I would have seen any of this." I didn't respond right away, because that was the truth. The hardest, clearest truth in all of it. Sometimes stepping back isn't abandonment. Sometimes it's the only way to let reality speak for itself. "I thought I was losing you," she said. I shook my head. "You weren't losing me," I said. "You were finding yourself." She looked up at me, her eyes filling slightly. "And now?" she asked. I smiled softly. "Now we rebuild," I said. "Not the way it was before, but something better, stronger, honest. Because this time, we weren't building on illusion. We were building on truth, and that made all the difference." The first few months after Emily left Brian were not easy. There's a version of stories like this where everything falls into place quickly, where decisions lead neatly to relief, where clarity immediately turns into peace. That wasn't our version. Ours was slower, messier, but real. Emily moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment about 15 minutes from my house. It wasn't fancy plain walls, modest furniture, a kitchen that felt more functional than inviting, but it was hers. That mattered. The first night she stayed there, she called me. "It's quiet," she said. "Is that a good thing or a hard thing?" I asked. There was a pause. Both, she admitted. I understood that, because quiet after chaos can feel unfamiliar, almost unsettling. But it's also where healing begins. Ethan adjusted faster than I expected. Children are resilient in ways adults often underestimate. Within a couple of weeks, he had learned the layout of the apartment, chosen his favorite corner of the living room for his toys, and even started referring to it as our place. One afternoon, as I sat with him at the small kitchen table helping with homework, he looked up at me and said something that stayed with me. "It's better when it's not loud," he said. I paused. "What do you mean?" I asked gently. He shrugged. "Mom and Dad used to argue a lot," he said. "Now it's just quiet." I nodded slowly. "Do you like that?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "It feels easier." Easier. Such a simple word, but it carried so much. Emily, on the other hand, had a different kind of adjustment. Not just physical, emotional, financial, legal. The process of untangling everything Brian had done was long and exhausting. There were accounts to review, debts to negotiate, documents to file. Some of the financial damage couldn't be undone completely, but it could be managed. Lisa guided her through it step by step, helping her understand what she was responsible for and what she could challenge. For the first time, Emily was seeing her own life in numbers. Clear ones. Not the vague explanations she had been given for years. It wasn't easy, but it was honest. And honesty, even when it's uncomfortable, has a way of grounding you. Our relationship changed too, in ways I hadn't expected. At first, there was a kind of carefulness between us. Not distance exactly, but awareness. We were both adjusting to a new dynamic, one that didn't revolve around me stepping in and her leaning on me without question. Now things were different. She asked for advice, not solutions. She made decisions, not requests. And I listened. More than I spoke. More than I guided. Because I had learned something through all of this. Support doesn't have to mean control. Love doesn't have to mean constant involvement. Sometimes the strongest kind of presence is the one that allows space. One evening, a few months after everything had settled into a new rhythm, Emily came over for dinner. It wasn't a planned thing. She just showed up, a small bag of groceries in her hand. "I thought we could cook together," she said. There was something about the simplicity of that moment that struck me. Not me bringing food to her. Not me solving a problem. Just us. Side by side. "Sounds perfect," I said. We spent the evening in the kitchen, moving around each other in an easy, familiar way, chopping vegetables, stirring sauce, laughing at small things. At one point she paused, leaning against the counter, watching me. What I asked, smiling. She shook her head slightly. "Nothing," she said. "It just feels different." How I asked. "Better," she said. I nodded. "I think so too." There was a quiet moment. Then she said something that stayed with me. "I didn't realize how much I was depending on you," she admitted. "Not just for help, but for decisions, for reassurance. For everything." I listened, letting her speak. "And I didn't realize how much that made me ignore what was happening in my own life," she added. I took a slow breath. "That's something a lot of people don't see until later," I said gently. She nodded. "I see it now," she said. There was no shame in her voice. Just understanding. "And you?" she asked suddenly. "How has it been for you?" The question caught me off guard. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because no one had asked me that in a long time. I thought about it for a moment. "It's been quieter," I said. She smiled slightly. "In a good way?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "In a good way." And it was true. For years, my life had been filled with movement, constant involvement, constant responsibility. Now there was space, time, a sense of balance I hadn't realized I was missing. I had started doing things for myself again, reading more, walking in the mornings, meeting Marlene for coffee without feeling like I needed to check my phone every 5 minutes. It wasn't loneliness. It was a presence, and that was something I hadn't felt in a long time. Later that evening, after dinner was finished and the dishes were done, we sat in the living room with cups of tea. Ethan had already fallen asleep in the guest room, exhausted from a full day. Emily looked at me, her expression thoughtful. "Mom," she said. "Yes." "Thank you," she said. "For what?" I asked. "For stopping," she said. The words were simple, but they carried everything. I felt a small, quiet shift in my chest. "You're welcome," I said softly. She shook her head slightly. "No," she said. "I mean it. I didn't understand it at the time. I thought you were pulling away from me." I nodded. "I know. But you weren't," she continued. "You were letting me see." I didn't respond right away, because that was exactly what had happened. Not intentionally, not at first, but ultimately, yes. "I needed that," she said. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw it. Strength, clarity, a version of her that hadn't existed before. "You did the hard part," I said. "You chose to face it." She smiled slightly. "I didn't do it alone," she said. "No," I agreed. "You didn't." We sat there in comfortable silence, after that, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. And as I looked around my home at the quiet, at the warmth, at the life that felt steady again, I realized something. This wasn't the ending I had imagined for us, but it was the one we needed, because what we had now wasn't built on dependency. It wasn't built on avoidance. It wasn't built on illusion. It was built on truth, and that made it stronger than anything we had before. Sometimes love isn't about holding on tighter. Sometimes it's about knowing when to let go. So everything real has a chance to finally come into the light. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's this: love and help are not the same thing. For a long time, I believed that loving someone meant doing everything I could to make their life easier, fixing problems before they grew, stepping in before they struggled, carrying what felt too heavy for them to carry alone. But what I didn't understand was that constant rescue can hide the truth. It can delay necessary growth, and sometimes without meaning to, it can protect the very situation that's hurting the person you love. Letting go, stepping back, felt like the hardest thing I had ever done. It felt like abandonment, like failure, like I was turning my back on my own child. But in reality, it created space. Space for clarity, space for truth, space for my daughter to see what was really happening in her own life. And once she saw it, everything changed. Boundaries are not rejection, they are protection. Not just for you, but for the people you love. If you've ever found yourself giving too much, carrying too much, losing yourself in someone else's life, I want you to know this. You are allowed to step back. You are allowed to choose balance. And sometimes, that choice can save more than you realize. Have you ever had to step back from someone you love in order to truly help them? I'd really like to hear your story. Share it in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life family stories like this. You're not alone in this journey.